Welcome to the Holistic Health Bites podcast. I'm your host, Andrea Nicholson, crime scene investigator turned metabolic health investigator. This podcast provides bite-sized episodes to help you have a pristine health scene so you can live a vibrant, adventure-filled life. Let's dive in. Welcome back to the Holistic Health Bites podcast. Today, I am joined with special guest Kaytee Hadley, and she's going to share some of her own personal journey, as well as some of the things she's learned along the way as a healthcare practitioner. So welcome, Kaytee.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And if you will just take a minute to tell us a little bit about yourself, how you got here, kind of what people might want to know about you.
Whenever I'm asked that or prompted with that question, I'm always like, okay, get ready to strap in because it's a journey. So I am a functional medicine dietitian that's specializing in gut health, specifically supporting folks who have had chronic GI symptoms. I'm talking the IBS or, the mysterious symptoms that you've had for 5, 10, 15, sometimes 50 years. I'm your go-to. So it hasn't really been a linear journey to get here, but I'm sure you can relate to this. I think every practitioner who's in the functional or holistic or alternative space is here because of their own journey. You don't really for most people, you don't just stumble upon it. It's a search for healing. And my story is no different. I had chronic GI symptoms, depression, anxiety, chronic infections, starting at a really young age. Like I'm talking first grade, second grade. And it was always, my parents were told she'll grow out of it. And I never did. And it got worse and worse and worse. And you talk about this, right? Because of the gut-brain connection, the two were feeding into each other. My gut issues were making my depression worse, and my depression was making it hard to make healthy choices. And it was all connected, and no one really understood that at that time. And this all sort of culminated to the point when I was 16 and I attempted suicide. And from that point on, at the time, it didn't feel like a major turning point. It just felt like it just kind of felt the same. But looking back, it really was. And my trajectory sort of changed. And it was because of a healthcare practitioner. And it was a simple fact that she told me. It was actually my therapist. And she said, what you eat can affect your mental health. And I thought, well, that's the craziest thing I've ever heard. And, we know that to be true now, but at that time I had never heard of it. It wasn't really talked about. And so I sort of went on this journey to trying to heal my brain, to heal my mind. And what I didn't realize was how much it was going to turn into this whole body approach. And so I, dabbled in fitness and studied nutrition and psychology and eventually, lifestyle medicine and ultimately functional medicine. And what I realized was I didn't have this chemical imbalance in my brain. I wasn't, destined to be this way. Like I had been told, at 14, my doctor told me, you're going to be like this for the rest of your life. How do you tell a child that?
Right.
And again, no discussion around, well, let's address what's going on in your physical body. And so long story short, I was able to sort of put all these pieces together, looking at my lifestyle, my nutrition, my movement, my sleep, and looking deep at my gut and all of these imbalances that were going on. And, of course, the emotional trauma. I mean, there's so many different facets, right, to wellness. And I was ultimately able to find healing for both my body and my mind. And what I was so shocked to realize in becoming a healthcare practitioner is the story that I experienced around just being told you're going to have to live with it is so commonplace, especially for women and especially with GI health. And so here I am to tell everyone, you don't have to live with it.
Yeah, you absolutely don't. There's always answers. And that's one of my main messages that I like to share with people too, is there's always an answer. So just because you haven't found it yet doesn't mean it doesn't exist. Keep fighting, keep pushing, keep asking questions, keep trying new things, be open to all the possibilities. And somewhere along the way, you will find the answers. Hopefully it doesn't, take a long time and many years like a lot of us have gone through ourselves, but keep looking, keep fighting, keep trying. There are answers out there. You can, at a minimum, improve things, if not completely reverse them.
Yeah, exactly. And it's really moving from that approach of symptom management to identifying and then addressing what's actually causing the symptoms, right? Symptoms are literally a symptom of what's going on. So, I mean, it's just so stupid, to be honest, when someone's told, oh, your symptoms aren't being caused by anything. Well, that literally is illogical because they're coming from somewhere. It just means you haven't found it. And so often with GI, we're not doing the right tests. There are such limited tests. And with the diagnosis of IBS is just this sort of wastebasket name for a set of symptoms. I mean, I was given the diagnosis of IBS when I was, in middle school. And every time I tried to see a new healthcare practitioner, try to get answers, I can't tell you how many GI specialists I saw. They just kept saying, well, it's IBS. And then I later found out, well, IBS means you've ruled out everything else and they still can't figure it out. And let's be honest, we didn't rule everything out, right? And two, over 70% of IBS is caused by SIBO, small intestine bacterial overgrowth. So there are root causes, but we're not looking in the right places. And to be honest, we're just being lazy. And by we, I mean as healthcare practitioners in the system. And it's not because healthcare practitioners aren't trying their best, but we have a system with 7-minute appointments. How much can you really dive into? So we have to kind of move out of that model if we're going to get real answers and address that root cause to find healing.
Yeah. And there's probably not just one underlying thing. Even if it is that small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, like it is in so many cases, well, what led to that? And what led to that? I mean, there's so many other factors. There's not just going to be one solution because you probably don't just have one problem. There's probably sleep issues and stress issues and toxin issues and nutrient deficiencies and, lack of sunshine and lack of movement. And all of these things also play in. So we need to stop looking for the one singular solution when these are pretty complex problems. The solution doesn't have to be complex, doesn't have to be comprehensive and, this big, overwhelming process, but it's probably going to be more than one thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's another issue that we run into is, I work with plenty of folks who've been given the diagnosis of, Crohn's or something that is related to what's actually going on, right? Versus IBS isn't really related. And so then they've done the things for it, but like you said, it's not a holistic approach. It's not looking at lifestyle. It's usually a pharmaceutical. And then there's no kind of thought of, well, is there anything else going on? And 90+% of the time, there's multiple things. Because I think what people and what we don't think about enough is just how much everything is connected. Just as we know that the mind and the body are connected, we have a specialist for the kidney and the skin and all these different specialists, which is great, right? We need people who have really in-depth knowledge, but sometimes we just have to take a step back and say, okay, but if your gut's not functioning properly, what else isn't functioning properly? Not only what's contributed to that, but what are the downstream consequences of that, right? Autoimmunity, food sensitivities, nutrient deficiencies. I mean, there's so many. So we have to think bigger picture. And also, like you said, the solutions don't have to be super complex. Sometimes they're very simple once we identify what all is going on. Now, it doesn't mean it's easy, right? Making lifestyle changes, if it was easy, everyone would do it. But it can be simple. And I think a big part of that is having the right people in the right place. Most people don't have enough support in the way that they need it, right? How many people, I'm raising my hand, have felt like they weren't heard by their who was supposed to be their support team, or their goals weren't really aligned. And so it's really important to find that person who's not only seeing the big picture like you are, but is supportive of the way you want to go about it. Because if you want to do lifestyle and you're being offered pharmaceuticals, or vice versa. I just got a phone call today from someone who said, hey, do you prescribe, medication for weight loss? Well, I'm not going to be the best person to support that person in their journey, and that's okay. But that's important to know and important to find that good match.
Yeah, absolutely. And then the support network in your own personal life as well. I think so many of us are just like, weight loss is a great example of this where, well, I just want to lose 10 pounds or I want to lose 50 pounds or whatever that is. But we don't dig deeper and really make it clear to everyone around us why that matters so much, why it's so important that you be on the same page, that you do things that help support me on my journey, that you don't do these things that make my journey harder. We need to really communicate these things with our practitioners, with our loved ones, with our coworkers and our friends and whoever else is going to have an impact on this journey. We need to be willing to say the hard things and really stand up for ourselves so that it's not harder than it needs to be. We need that support.
100%. And it starts with getting really crystal clear for ourselves. Again, just using that weight loss example, it's why 10 pounds? Like, what does that actually mean? Because at the end of the day, it has nothing to do with the scale for most people, right? At the end of the day, getting rid of your GI symptoms, it's really a tool that you're using to live whatever life you're trying to live. And if that's getting in the way, which it really, really does, then you're being prevented from so much. And so if you can get really granular about what is that vision, what is that life that you're really striving towards, it's so much bigger than just that simple goal. And then to be able to communicate that is so important. And there's so many different types of support, right? There's emotional support. There's like the tangible support, like, if you're working with a teen and their parents not supportive, how are they going to, go grocery shopping or financial support? And then there's the guidance support, and all of them are so incredibly important. And, unfortunately, oftentimes it is really hard for friends and family to get on board. I think that we live in sort of a culture right now that frowns upon making decisions to take care of yourself in some circumstances. So if it kind of goes against the grain, if it feels like an inconvenience for other people, and I think also sometimes our friends and family feel like they then have to reflect on themselves, like, oh man, Andrea's taking care of herself now. Like, oof. Why am I not doing that? Why am I not sleeping well and eating well and doing the things? And we sort of act like a reflection, like a mirror. And that's hard for people. But there's also so much room for change and improvement once we know how to communicate and can kind of come up with a plan together. I mean, that's so key. I'm so sick of hearing like, people just need more self-control and they just need to, get over their excuses. Like when I worked in fitness, I'm like, yeah, but those excuses are real. Like this person is a functioning adult. Like if there aren't obstacles, I don't know what world you're living in, right? So to really focus on and get crystal clear on what those obstacles are so that you can, literally climb over them or go around them or remove them to find success. I mean, that's so important in the journey.
Yeah, I think just speaking to that obstacle piece, so many people think it should be easy. It should be simple. I've made my decision and this is the path I'm taking. And like the clouds should part and everything should just magically happen. No, obstacles are going to come up. Challenges are going to come up. We need to plan for those.
Part of the process.
Yeah. Some things are going to come up randomly that you couldn't possibly have predicted. You're going to have a death in the family, or you're going to have, whatever, a project at work comes up. Something's going to come up that you did not see coming. But most of the time, our challenges and our obstacles are things we knew were coming. We knew the holidays were coming. We knew the vacation was coming. We knew family was coming to visit. We knew all of these things, and we failed to plan in advance how we were going to navigate that situation. So the more you can actively do that, the less you're leaving to chance and to willpower.
Yeah.
If you plan ahead, willpower doesn't matter. You're not going to just find it like a bad penny on the sidewalk. You have to plan for these things and be very strategic in your decisions. And then you'll be that much more prepared for those things that you couldn't have predicted.
Well, I think it really comes down to the mindset of what kind of a change is this? Is it related to, is it more of a kind of a trend, a diet, a short term, put a Band-Aid on it? And I mean this for, sort of everything, whether you're just trying to get healthy or whether you're addressing a specific, health condition like, a GI imbalance. Or are you really looking for a sustainable solution? Because they are going to be very different approaches. While there may be some crossover in terms of what you're actually doing, they're going to be incredibly different approaches and an incredibly different mindset around it. And at the end of the day, action has to come first and then emotion follows. So, there's a lot of times where we don't feel that motivation or we feel like now's not a good time. But the reality is, if you're going for something sustainable, then that's always going to be a part of the equation, and that's okay. That's totally okay. And the purpose is not to give you some crazy plan that's, looks great on paper, but is just so incredibly unrealistic. You're setting yourself up for failure. It's really to come up with a plan together and then take one little step at a time. Sometimes the lowest hanging fruit is truly so simple to get you feeling a little better so that you can start doing more.
Yeah. And I don't think it needs to be super complicated. I think you can pick the lowest hanging fruit. And then once that just becomes who you are, pick the next lowest hanging fruit and pick the next one and the next one. And you can just baby step your way into these things. It's generally when you just dive straight into the deep end that people fail, because it's overwhelming and too complicated and too much, too fast, too big. And so we just need to take a step back and pick one thing. Start there. Go for a walk. Go to bed earlier. Pick one thing. Doesn't matter. Just pick something and start there. Yeah. I think that's great advice. So what do you see as maybe some of the top mistakes that people are making when they come to see you and they're just finally at their wits end, and they feel like they've tried it all and they've done everything possible and nothing is working? What are some of the things that you're like, well, as a professional, I can see where you've gone wrong? What are some of those mistakes that people are making?
There's a few that come to mind. The most obvious one is people feeling like they're at wit's end because they say, I've tried everything. And I say, okay, let's go through everything you've tried. What worked? What hasn't? One time I worked with someone who said this, and this individual was not related to GI. It was migraines, and he had migraines literally his entire life. And he met with me in his mid-20s. And I mean, it was debilitating. It was most days out of the month. Couldn't hold a consistent job. He was just in so much pain. Relationships were obviously suffering. He was suffering. I mean, it was awful. So I said, all right, come to our first session with literally everything that you've tried so we can kind of see where we're at. And he sent me a multiple page PDF of medications. And I said, okay, tell me more about this. Okay, well, they generally work for a little bit and then they don't work. All right. Have you ever talked with someone or worked with someone to find food triggers? No one's ever talked to me about that before. Okay. Has anyone ever talked to you about the role of circadian rhythm? No. What about movement? No. What about stress? Well, I know that stress triggers it for myself. Okay. What about structural alignment, spine, all this? Scalp? No, never heard of it. And this individual had been told that there was nothing more that could be done. And after a few months, he was literally migraine free. I mean, that, again, it goes back to what we're being told. So I think that I'm very careful to let people know, this is not, it's not your fault. We tend to tend to kind of blame people sometimes in the way that our media speaks about health. And if you're not feeling great, what are you doing wrong? And the reality is that it really comes down to an individualized approach and so much bigger than a pill. And something else that I tend to see is this so people who are more mindful of wanting a more natural approach. So instead of taking a pharmaceutical, they want to take herbs. So we're trading this pill for the ill for the herb for the symptom. And while I'm all for managing symptoms 100%, we're still taking the same approach. We're still taking a really surface level approach. Now, is it more natural? Yeah. But it's not getting to the root of it. And so talking to people about, when we first meet, what are the suspicions that are coming to mind? I'm hearing their symptoms and their past medical history and, how food affects them and whatnot. And then we can start talking about, well, what could be going on under the surface before we even start testing, right? To help guide us. And for so many people, their minds are just blown because they're like, oh, I thought you were just going to, talk to me about a low FODMAP diet and give me some herbs. Like, I didn't realize that we could actually find out more information. And so I think these are just some mindset shifts that people often go through because it's just not talked about enough. You don't know what you don't know. And I was absolutely in that place when I was, in my healing journey.
Yeah. And I've 100% been there too. And I've also fallen into the bucket of, trade medications for, supplements, which I agree is better. It is more natural. It is, generally less side effects and all that. But like you said, it's not getting to the actual root cause. You're still masking the symptoms. I am a big believer in temporary use of supplements to help the body kind of get back on track. But ultimately, it's your lifestyle that's going to keep you there. It's the quality sleep, it's the exercise, it's the stress management, it's the getting sunlight and drinking good water and minimizing toxin exposure. These are the things that are actually going to keep you there.
Right.
The supplement might make you feel better in the temporary, just like the medicine did, but it doesn't fix the problem. It's all those other things that are actually the problem that are contributing to the original cause. And therefore, those are also the fixes. So I think that's a great message. So in your journey and in your practice now, that when you're working with these gut clients, I know you work a lot with the 5R protocol. Can you kind of just walk everybody through what that means? What does that look like? How does that help, and just sort of that whole picture?
Yeah. So the 5R approach to gut health is really just a functional medicine framework. The framework has to be tailored and individualized, but it's a really nice way to think about the different steps that we need to take. Now, I'll talk about what they are, but just keep in mind, if you're listening, that it's not necessarily 1 and then 2 and then 3. It depends on what's going on in your body in terms of how we put the pieces together, but they should all be examined. So the first R, and whenever I say this, people are like, what are you saying? R? What is this word? It's like literally the letter R. So the first R word is remove. So we need to remove anything that's shouldn't be there, anything that's disrupting the body and the gut. So for me, one of the things I had to remove was parasites. This is something no one wants to think about, but unfortunately they do happen. I have no idea how I got parasites, but I had 2 of them. So remove anything that shouldn't be in the gut. Also removing foods that aren't right for you and your body. So foods that are going to be triggering you right now. This is where that individualized approach is really, really key. When you're being triggered by foods, there's a lot of fear that comes along with that, because you don't know what foods are going to trigger you and when, and then you tend to eat less and less and less foods. So instead, we want to identify what are the foods that are actually triggering you, so we can take those out and then expand your diet. It's not to be restrictive long-term at all, but if we can get those foods out to let your gut heal and let your body heal, reduce inflammation, all of that, that's really powerful. So that's what we remove. The other thing that comes to mind could also be pathogenic bacteria, like in SIBO. Again, something else I had 2 types of SIBO. This was after 15 years of being told there was nothing wrong. And we haven't even gotten to the extent of everything that was there. I had 2 types of bacterial overgrowth. I had a pathogenic bacteria. I had 2 types of parasites. We'll get to the rest. So that's the remove. Then we have replace. So anything that's missing that our body really needs. Now, commonly in our gut, because of whatever imbalances are occurring, our body can't produce enough, maybe stomach acid or digestive enzymes, things like that, to actually help us digest. so that we can get the nutrients from our foods. Because you could be eating an incredible diet, but if you can't digest and absorb and then assimilate those nutrients, you're going to be depleted. So that's another thing that we want to replace is nutrients. So common to have nutritional deficiencies. It's almost a guaranteed. And, when I look at, you were talking about this in a podcast you did a couple of weeks ago, when we look at labs, we don't just want to look at what's the quote unquote normal, but we want to look at what is the optimal level for functioning. And so we can replace nutrients to get back to that point. The third R is repair. So we need to repair the gut lining. This is also something I had, what's called leaky gut or intestinal permeability, which is essentially where the cells of the gut, they should kind of be like Velcro and they become loose. And so we can get protein molecules getting through, bacteria, things like that. And that can cause food triggers, an inflammatory response, an immune response. And this can show up all over the body, aches and pains, brain fog, stomach upset. And we have to repair that gut lining to stop that process. One thing that I see often is someone who was diagnosed, so they had GI symptoms, and then they were diagnosed with one autoimmune condition. And then a few years later, another one, and another one. And no one has pointed back to the gut health, that leaky gut, contributing to the autoimmunity. So we have to repair the gut. Then we also need to re-inoculate. This is the one that everyone gets stuck on right now. All over the media, we're always talking about probiotics. I can't tell you how many people I've worked with where the medical advice they were given was take a probiotic. They took a probiotic, some of them it helped, some of them it made it worse. So re-inoculating the gut, getting that healthy balance of bacteria, right? Our gut's like a community of bacteria. We need to make sure that that's healthy and thriving, but that doesn't necessarily mean just throw a probiotic on it. So I just want to put that plug there. Like there's a very specific approach to that. And then the fifth R is rebalance. And this is where we're really looking at our whole lifestyle. How is our sleep, our stress, our exercise, all of these different pieces, how are they contributing to our gut health? Because to your point earlier, while it's great to know if you have SIBO or leaky gut or X, Y, or Z, the next question is why? And so much of it comes down to our lifestyle. Look, if you were born via C-section and then you had to take antibiotics as a kid, you can't change your past, but you can absolutely work to repair that and then work on rebalancing your lifestyle now. And so that fifth R is really that sustainability piece to bring it all together. So again, so that's the 5R approach, and we have to use it as a framework to really individualize the approach. Some people might need to work more on, 2 or 3 of them. Someone else, maybe it's all 5. And so by identifying what are the specific imbalances that are going on, you can restore that by focusing on this.
Oh, I love it. That's a great explanation of how that whole framework comes to be and all the different components that play into that. I'd love to know a little bit about what are some of your favorite tools to actually identify what's going on. How do you find out if you have parasites and all of these other imbalances or overgrowths that are happening?
So there are many different options depending on what the symptoms are. And I always kind of hesitate when I get asked this question at first, because I want people to know that even if you don't have a massive budget, you can still get a lot of answers. Many providers rely very heavily on testing, but I really take an approach of what's going to work for the individual. I do not see myself as I never tell someone what they need to do. My goal is to really support people. You shouldn't have to go through 10 plus years of education like I did to understand what the heck's going on in your body. So my role is really to help distill down the information, talk to you about it, present you with options. And all of those options have pros and cons, right? A pro of a stool test might be great. We're going to get all these different information about X, Y, and Z. A con might be for someone, the cost. Or I live with roommates and I don't know that I feel comfortable doing a stool test at home. Like, that's weird, right? So there are so many different pieces that we really do have to consider in terms of identifying what are the best tests. So there's a lot of options, and it has to be, again, personalized. Okay, so common ones that I do use stool testing. So this is literally where a kit is shipped to your house, and you take a little sample with a little tiny spoon and mix it up and ship it back. And this gives us a lot of information, not just about parasites and, things like that, but also about how well are you digesting protein, carbs, fat? Do you have inflammation in the gut? How is that microbial balance? Are you having some kind of immune reaction in your gut? So that can give us a lot of information. It can also tell us things. People are always shocked by this. It can actually give us insights to how well are you detoxing? How well is your gut microbiome supporting your hormone balance? This is something I see all of the time, hormonal imbalances that have been in part contributed by this gut dysbiosis. So that's one really great test that I use. With a stool test, we're looking more at the large intestine, which is at the very end of our GI system. It doesn't tell us a whole lot about what's going on in the small intestine. So I also use things like SIBO breath testing, which is to look at if there's bacterial overgrowth in the small intestine. I also use testing to look for fungal overgrowth. This is really, really common and very hard to test for, but shows up a lot. Also nutritional deficiencies. So this could be a blood draw. Again, a kit is shipped to your house. You take it to a blood draw center. Maybe you pee in a cup and it goes along with the kit. So looking at things like direct markers of how high or low are your nutrients that are stored in the body, but also what we call organic acids, which tells us a little bit more about how well are the pathways actually functioning. Because sometimes we run into the issue where we technically have enough in our body, but our body's not using it properly. And so then we have to dig into that more. I also sometimes will run testing like heavy metals. If someone, for example, has mercury amalgams or recently had them removed, that can play a role. What else? There's so many different ones. I would say the stool test, the SIBO test, nutritional deficiencies, those are the ones that are most common kind of foundation since we're talking about gut health. And what's really interesting and frustrating is that these tests are so widely available and so well supported by literature and clinical experience and patient success, and yet they're not available for most people when you go to your primary doctor or your gastroenterologist. I mean, I can't tell you how many GI doctors I went to, and no one ever talked to me about SIBO. That was something I learned about way later on. It was like, wait, why didn't I have a classic presentation of SIBO? No one ever talked about it. I know they had the testing, but most of them aren't even really educated on it. Similarly, stool testing that we do conventionally is very limited. I mean, even the parasitology alone is like, Giardia, a couple of your really common ones, but one of the parasites I had was incredibly common and I was never tested for it before. So we have sort of versions of these tests that are not very comprehensive. And I think the danger of using them is that then people think they shouldn't look at that anymore. Like, oh, well, I had a stool test from my doctor last year and nothing came up. Okay, well, let me see your stool test. Okay, they tested you for 5 parasites and calprotectin. Like, that's nothing. Great, we ruled out IBD, but what about everything else? So there's so much there that can be looked at, again, depending on what you want to do, what your symptoms are, what your budget is, and so forth. But I've also worked with folks who are like, look, I'm going to spend everything I have to work with you, and I can't afford testing right now. And so I say, okay, we're going to work with that. And there's plenty of different, now it's not as straightforward. We're going to have to do some finagling and prepare to take a little bit more time. But if you know where to look, and if you're in touch with your body, this is so important. We live in, as a woman, I've only ever been a woman in our culture, so I can't speak to what it's like to be anything else. But I know that there is a lot of messages about don't listen to your body. Oh, if you're hungry, drink some water. If you want the cake, eat an apple. If you're not feeling tired, like just push through it. Like just a lot of messages around not listening to your body. And instead, I encourage the opposite, really practicing mindfulness around your symptoms and how you're responding physically and mentally and emotionally to the different therapeutic strategies that we're trying, because that's a really good representation of the direction we're headed. And so if you can do that, then using your own response and again some guidance can absolutely get you far as well.
Yeah, I think that last part is a huge component that so many of us need to reconnect to our bodies. We really need to start listening again and paying attention to, am I truly hungry? Am I truly lacking sleep? Am I not getting good quality sleep, even though I feel like I'm asleep all night long? Am I thirsty? Do I need, whatever that is? We really do need to get back into being in touch with what our bodies are trying to tell us. They will tell us what they need. We just have to be listening, and we have to be willing to actually do that thing. So I think that's a really powerful message. And, it takes practice. It's not an easy thing to do, but it's free. If you get good at it, you can do a lot just by listening to your body. I think that's a tremendous way to go. And, I'm like you, I love testing. I love that cold, hard, solid, objective data. But I think we can also go a long way just by paying attention to what your body is telling us. What are your symptoms? When do they come up? How often do they come up? How severe are they? What else do you have? All these things that seem like they might not even be related. Like maybe you do have migraines and joint pain and fatigue. Well, maybe those are all coming from the same thing.
Yeah.
Maybe not.
Yeah.
Maybe they're coming from 3 different things, but we need to really dive in deep. And I know sometimes those comprehensive questionnaires and conversations can be like, oh, why are we talking about this again? But it's in those detailed conversations that we pull together some of that information. And that might just be the key to get you the targeted answer that you're looking for. So I think that's great information that you just shared on both the testing and the not testing. So I think that's a good approach. Do you have, oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, even people are always shocked to hear that symptoms in your fingernails or in your mouth, do you get canker sores? Do you have a fissure down your tongue? Do you have scalloped edges? Do you have a red tongue? Like, do you have white spots on your nail? Like all of these nitty gritty things that just feel normal because we've only ever lived in our body, that when you start asking questions about it or pointing it out, it's like, oh, wait, I was working with a woman recently. She was so sweet. And she said something about when she wakes up when she wakes up and has tingly fingers. And I said, hold on, let's talk about that. So we started talking about it. And she was like, wait, other people don't experience that? She had never lived in anyone else's body. So how would she know in what capacity do you usually talk about that? So, my conversations with folks, usually my initial conversation session is 90 minutes to 2 hours, because I'm like, just talk, just tell me everything. And people are always like, I feel like I'm rambling. I'm like, trust me, you are not rambling. Everything is relevant. And you never know what that little tiny piece of information is going to be, that missing piece, because it really is a puzzle.
Yeah. And I think so often, like you said, we don't even know the things that we've always experienced that aren't ideal. That's just all we've ever known. I was that way when I was younger. I had no idea that I was technically, officially, chronically constipated. That's all I ever knew. It was my normal. I didn't know. It wasn't until I really learned what normal, healthy, adequate bowel movements are that I went, oh, I'm nowhere near in that bucket. But you don't even know. And so these conversations can be so enlightening to pick up on things that you think are totally normal and that everyone is experiencing, or that are at least normal for you. And just because they're common for you does not make them normal, and certainly does not make them ideal or optimal. So as painful as it can seem to get into these deeper conversations, this is where those nuggets come from. When you really dive in and pay attention to those little tiny things, and, like the white spots on your nails, it's like, oh, that actually means something. Yeah, a lot of times it does. It can be something that innocuous that actually gives you all of the answers you need. So I think that's a great tidbit. Do you have any final words you'd like to leave everybody with?
I think I just want to leave folks with this kind of message of hope. If you feel like you've been struggling for a long time, or if you haven't felt heard, you haven't felt understood, if you feel like you've been just kind of getting by, but you know that you're not living your best life, there is so much more. And, speaking from very personal experience, it's worth it to keep looking, and it's worth it to keep trying. And it's not easy, but you deserve it. You deserve to be able to, I don't know, for me, that one of the big turning points is wanting to go on a backpacking trip and knowing that I couldn't do it if I was going to be having to run to the bathroom every hour. Like, what, backpacking for 2 weeks? There's no way. So stay in touch with why, with what it is that's driving you, and don't be afraid to keep looking. If you're working with someone and you feel like, I don't quite think we're aligned, that's okay. And you deserve to get the kind of support that you need to reach those goals. And again, it's possible. If you've been told to just live with it, I want to tell you to give them the middle finger and walk away, because you do not have to live with it. It is not there for no reason. It is there for a reason. And you can absolutely find healing.
No, that's a great message to leave everyone with. And I 100% agree. There's always a way through whatever challenge you're facing, and take this as your sign that now is the time. If you're listening to this podcast, then this is your time to start taking action on it and find someone who will help you. And if that one happens to be Kaytee, how do they reach you? How do they find you?
Yeah, absolutely. So my website is the best place to find me. It's kayteehadley.com. I spell my first name Kaytee, like Kaylee, but KT. kayteehadley.com. And there's a link on there to schedule a free call. Working with someone for your health journey is a very intimate, very personal decision. So I'm happy to get on a call and just chat, hopefully provide another perspective, talk more about what that would look like, and, get the ball rolling, keep the ball rolling.
That is fantastic. And of course, we will link up all of that information in the show notes so that you can just click right over to Kaytee's website. Thank you so much for sharing all of your amazing wisdom and information today. And I think everyone got a lot of great information and now has some action steps that they can take, whether it be things they can do on their own or practitioners that they can reach out to. So thank you so much for your time. And thank you everyone for listening. And we will catch you again on future episodes. Thanks for being a faithful listener to the podcast. I'd love it if you left me a 5-star review on this podcast so that others can more easily find this valuable information. Did you know I also work one-on-one with clients? I approach solving health challenges like I approached solving crimes, by conducting a thorough investigation into your case. Whether you're looking to lose weight, boost your energy, fix your digestive system, or reduce inflammation, I can help. All you have to do to get started is book a free call. The link is in the show notes.